So, with the recent death of 2018 Mr. Olympia Shawn Rhoden, which itself is a tragedy, and the passing of someone who I also knew uh, from my time back at Fifth Avenue Gym, George Peterson, who's also another top IFBB professional bodybuilder. In addition to the number of professional and amateur IFBB and NPC competitors who have died, sadly, over the past year and in recent times, and the increased rate of deaths from the massive amounts of drugs that these athletes use to create the look that today seems to be what's required to win competitions in those particular organizations. Some have called for drug testing. And the reason why I'm making this video is in response to what I consistently see and what I've consistently seen over the past 27 years of my being here in the US and working with the natural organizations and really seeing the policies that the non-drug tested shows and competitors tend to use. And I think it's important that we talk about these things because I'm not sure that the general public is really aware. And part of that problem is whenever there's talk of the NPC or IFBB or any competition that's not drug tested, bringing in drug testing, real drug testing, and promoting athletes who are not just drug tested, but who any rational, sane looking individual could say, this person is most likely not on drugs. The common thread is that the general public doesn't want to see people who aren't using steroids. The common thread is the general public wants to see the freak show. They want to see someone who is, almost 300 pounds, ripped to shreds. They want to see someone who has a unreal degree of conditioning. They want to see women who are, body fat levels with not a hint of cellulite whatsoever. They want to see ridiculousness. They want to see things that aren't real. And for all this time, the public has always kind of known that drugs are part of competing in bodybuilding. And the public tends to not know that natural bodybuilding even exists. And as a real natural bodybuilder, and when I say real natural bodybuilder, I'm saying someone who doesn't take drugs, didn't take drugs. And to be honest with you, if I took drugs and looked like this, I want my money back. As someone who's been a lifetime natural bodybuilder, who's promoted natural bodybuilding competitions, who's judged natural bodybuilding competitions, I'm always astounded by the fact that whenever the conversation of drug testing comes up with the non-drug tested organizations, the competitors, the ones who profit the most from the competitions, tend to all say the same thing, which is no one wants to see natural, unenhanced athletes. Always being said, no one wants to see it. And then they give examples of what a natural bodybuilder would look like. And those examples don't look anything like any of the competitors that I know personally, that I grew up seeing, who I can put my head on a chopping block myself and say, these people are natural. They're not using drugs. They didn't use drugs. They really are men and women who, some of them I've seen from the time they started to the time they got on stage, people who worked their behinds off to achieve a level of physical excellence without anything, without no SARMs, no testosterone, none of that. And they look fantastic. But here's the problem. No one knows about natural bodybuilding. When I say no one, relatively no one. The fan base for natural bodybuilding is ridiculously small and disproportionately so compared to drug bodybuilding. And one of the reasons why that is because whenever there is an example of what a natural bodybuilder looks like, they always choose pictures of people who look very much to me like first-time competitors or novice class competitors. I've never seen at any point in time anyone talking about what a natural bodybuilder looked like who put an example of a true natural bodybuilder. And to make matters worse, what they tend to say as well is, well, there are all these fake natties, fake natural bodybuilders, people who say they don't take drugs, but we all know that they do. People who take testosterone replacement therapy and claim somehow or the other that because it's a doctor prescribing it to them that somehow that they're natural. And there are really and truly a ridiculous number of really popular fitness personalities who say that they're natural, who I can tell you for a fact aren't. I'm not saying it because of, hearsay. I'm not saying it because of anything else. I'm saying it because I'm from the industry. I know a lot of drug dealers. I know a lot of people who sell drugs, and some of them sell drugs to people who claim to be natural. I also know, as a competitor, that I've competed in natural competitions against men who later went on to fail the drug tests. So there are people in natural bodybuilding competitions who do take drugs and who do pretend to be natural. It is a real phenomenon. But I've been in natural bodybuilding and aware of it since I've been in this country for 27, 28 years. And the number of individuals who I can point fingers to who I know for a fact say they're natural or said they were natural and competing in natural competitions, but really and truly weren't, was a handful. And to be honest, they almost always went on to keep on competing in other organizations where they were able to use drugs openly. That's usually what I've seen. But their examples and the popularity of the fake natural bodybuilders on social media has cast a huge shadow on what natural bodybuilding is, what it looks like, and what it can be. In all of my years, I have never heard of the passing of any currently competing natural bodybuilder. It's never happened. No one's ever died. I've also, and I can attest as a former competitor, because I stopped competing in 2004. That was my last competition. And you can take a look at what I look like now, and this is what 47 years old looks like with being a lifetime natural bodybuilder, following the bodybuilding lifestyle. And I may not compete anymore, but I try to be an example of what you can look like without using drugs. When I was competing, I was one of the first natural bodybuilders to bring a DVD out there to try to show, hey, this is what natural bodybuilding really looks like. And to try to help the up and coming generation see that you could be strong, you could be impressive without having to stick a needle in your body, without having to go to any such extremes. And I think from my years on the promoting side of natural bodybuilding and my years of being behind the scenes, what I've seen is whenever a truly natural bodybuilder makes it to the IFBB Pro Leagues and Pro ranks, there is, and there was, from the officials, pressure and straight out talk that you cannot say that you are natural, because by saying that you are competing naturally, you're drawing public attention to the fact that the athletes are on drugs. Now, we can look at the Mr. Olympic competitors today from the 90s, from the 80s, from the 70s and the 60s, and you would be completely wrong if you thought that they were natural. But most people do think that they're natural because people assume, well, of course, there must be some drug testing in bodybuilding, and these guys are just genetic freaks who look fantastic. That's not what it is. The other thing that's important to note and to talk about and to say is that every single person who I know who used drugs, who I had that conversation with, this particular conversation with, where I said, do you think, as someone who's pretty much used drugs for your entire career, that you could look the way you look if you never used drugs? And every single one of them said that they could. And the fallacy exists as well, and it constantly comes up as well, this idea that, well, if the guys who are at the top of professional bodybuilding now, and the women who are at the top of professional bodybuilding right now, if they were natural, they'd still be at the top, because there's so many genetic freaks out there who went so far without, even touching a drug. And that's completely nonsense. It's completely nonsense, and it helps perpetuate the idea that natural bodybuilding, somehow or the other, is a bit of a joke. That natural bodybuilding are the also-rans, the guys and girls who weren't good enough genetically or didn't work hard enough. They didn't go to the gym 7 days a week and do cardio twice a day the way everybody else did. So there's no way you can expect them to look fantastic. Well, interestingly enough, I think that in the modern age, given the fact that there's so much of a constant among those who are in the drug-tested field, always talk down about those who are not using drugs, that it's really fear-based. And it's a strategy that's been in place literally since I have been involved in bodybuilding and seeing how it works behind the scenes. I know IFBB professional bodybuilders who were natural when they were competing. I know the pressure they went through to keep quiet about the fact that they were natural. I know as well about what happened, and I was part of an organization trying to do its best to create a credible alternative, a credible drug-tested professional bodybuilding alternative. And I think that the IFBB and the NPC and those that profit from those competitions, and we're talking about supplement companies, we're talking about today people on social media who use those competitions as well to try and enhance their careers. I think what we're seeing is that because natural bodybuilding doesn't really have the backing of the supplement companies, the money coming in to promote it, and because there's always this constant refrain from those who are at the top as far as social media is concerned today, and back then was the magazines, same thing, that this is bodybuilding at the highest level and there's nothing else. Everything else is a joke. Because of that, there aren't any natural bodybuilders I know who have millions of followers on social media. None. Zero. The athletes who have won the world championships in different federations, and these are people competing against the best of the best internationally in the different organizations that are drug tested. And when I say drug tested, you get a polygraph test, you get a urine test, and one can argue as to whether you can beat those tests or not. Some people I know for a fact have, but a lot of people I know for a fact didn't have to. They look fantastic. They look truly impressive. The degree of muscularity, the degree of conditioning, the degree of development that they're able to attain, both the men and the women without drugs, is remarkable. They're repeat champions, people who have won these competitions several times over, and no one knows about them. They have barely a couple thousand followers on social media. Barely. Compare that to someone competing at the amateur level using drugs in, let's say, the NPC with millions. Compare that with people at the IFBB level, professional level, with millions of followers, hundreds of thousands of followers, all the endorsements. Think about how much money goes into keeping that hierarchy where it is. And part of keeping that hierarchy the way it is also convincing the fans that natural bodybuilding is a joke, and that natural bodybuilding isn't legitimate, and that nobody really looks like anything worth seeing. And anybody who does look good, who is natural, is actually on drugs. Well, we can always say that, anyone can say they're not on drugs. How can you ever really know? Well, I really know for a fact with a lot of them, and I really know it myself as well. And I think it's time that we look at the deaths of all these men and women, and some of them over the years are my friends. People who I know, people who I actually know, people who I care about. And, you hear about the Sean Roden dying, and you hear about George Peterson passing away, and that was horrible. And it is horrible, but you don't hear about all the amateurs, the people who are trying to become professional bodybuilders who die in the process. They don't have any big names, they don't have a big following on Instagram, you don't know who they are, and they're dying. They've been dying for a long time. And I'm tired of there not being an acknowledgement that there's another way to do this, that you can look fantastic. Young people need to have the opportunity to choose and not be told the way I was told throughout my entire career that I'm not serious about my bodybuilding career because I'm not taking steroids. Kevin, when are you going to get serious and start taking a little bit of drugs? Kevin, you know that if you want to be at the top level, you have to use some drugs. When's that going to stop? When is it going to be that people have the right to make an informed decision by seeing people in front of them who look fantastic and who are truly natural? And to everybody out there who is using drugs and saying you don't use drugs, I'm going to tell you, as a kid who grew up reading all those bodybuilding magazines and believing that nonsense, that it was genetics and that somehow those at the top were just so much genetically better than everybody else, that's why they looked the way they did. And then becoming a bodybuilder, meeting them, talking to them, being around them as a teenager, and having that gut-wrenching splash of cold water in my face that, no, Kevin, they use drugs. The reason why they're bigger than you is because they use drugs. The reason why their arms are 21 inches plus is because they use drugs. Here's what they use. Here's what they do. What about you? You're going to use drugs too to look like them? And it was really hard to say no because there wasn't much of anything out there saying that you could look fantastic without using drugs. My career as a natural bodybuilder, which isn't much of a big career to begin with, was really a stab in the dark. It was really, I wanted to look like a comic book character, and I thought for a fact that I might never get there, but I'm going to do my best. I didn't know how far I could go because I didn't have any examples. Kids need to have examples. People need to have examples. People need to see that you can look fantastic. I grew up without those examples and came to New York in the mid-90s and was blessed to go to a gym, Fifth Avenue gym, which was literally one of the meccas of natural bodybuilding here in the United States. We don't have that anymore. We don't have people with tons of followers on Instagram. And there's always that refrain that no one wants to see a natural bodybuilding competition. And here's my challenge to you. Go look up every single natural bodybuilding federation that there is and look at the top champions. Go look up some of the past champions. You'll be impressed. You'll be really, really, really impressed. And it's important that we do not let those who use drugs and those who profit from the use of drugs, competitions that promote the use of drugs, competitions where I'm going to tell you for a fact, based on people who I know, if you don't use drugs, the judges will come to you and tell you when you're going to get serious and that you're not going to go any further unless you do this, unless you do that, unless you do this, unless you do that. That's what they say. That's where it comes from. The blood of anyone who passes away in these competitions is on their hands. And it doesn't have to be that way because I believe wholeheartedly that if the general public had a choice between looking like any of the professional bodybuilders, male and female, that use drugs, and the ones who don't use drugs, comparatively, I think they'd probably choose the ones who don't use drugs. I think they'd look at those physiques and say, hey, that looks more like what I would want to look like. Frank Zane, by no stretch of the imagination, former Mr. Olympia, was not drug-free. And I think it's really important that we say that. But more people want to look like him than, let's say, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who also wasn't drug-free. Because Frank Zane had what people call, it looked like an attainable physique, which I'm going to say straight out, it isn't, it wasn't, it can't be. Once you use drugs, you are not on the same level as somebody who is not using drugs. The difference is remarkable and ridiculous. And again, the genetically gifted aren't the ones at the top levels of bodybuilding. It's the ones who are genetically predisposed to respond the best to using those drugs. I know for a fact, in some of the gyms I've been in, that more than half the people in the gym are using drugs. And in the entire gym, maybe 10 of them look, decent. 10. Maybe 10 of them look like they could probably, do well, maybe not at a professional level, but, could probably, do something in the sport of bodybuilding. But the other 90 of them, they use more drugs than the ones who look good, usually. That's usually what it is. And they don't work any less. It's not that they're working less. It's just that their bodies don't respond to drugs the way that some people do. And a lot of the bodybuilders that are at the top simply are those who number one, are genetically predisposed to having fantastic results from using drugs, and also mentally inclined to put their lives at risk and do things that medically go and come with some serious risks. And that's their choice. It doesn't mean that you take drugs away that it would be an even playing field, that somehow they'd still be on top. That's a myth. That's not true. Never was, never will be. And there are also lots of natural bodybuilders who I know personally who started using drugs. And some of them, yes, did end up being top level, but a lot of them didn't. I know people who had fantastic natural physiques started using drugs and didn't really look, they got bigger, but they didn't go all the way because they simply didn't respond. That's the reality. We need to talk about the realities of drug use and talk about the realities of natural bodybuilding and talk about the fact that if you're a natural bodybuilder like me, you're more focused on your job trying to make ends meet by what you do on a regular basis than you are being a bodybuilder. Being a bodybuilder is kind of like something you do on the side. It's not your life. It's not the be all and end all because there's no real money in it. We have to really work. We have to really, have regular jobs. I remember when Ronnie Coleman was a police officer and people were thinking how strange it was to have someone who was a real working man preparing for, high levels of competition. How ironic it was because I didn't know anybody who was competing at the time in the natural field who didn't have a job or two. We're regular people, but we're here. And by saying that we don't exist doesn't make it such that we don't exist. And that's what's been perpetuated for decades. I want you to please take the time, go look up the natural drug-tested bodybuilding federations. If you're really a bodybuilding fan, go see some of those contests. When I was competing, seats were filled back in the days. Now, partly because there's so many competitions and so many different organizations, which is also part of the problem, as natural bodybuilding federations don't have a united front that come together. And so the public never really gets the opportunity to know what's going on because there's not enough of a concentration in terms of promotion for one contest. And of course, everyone has their shows on the same day. And of course, that there aren't that many young people out there who are going into natural bodybuilding competitions. You go to a natural bodybuilding competition and the teenage category, which back in my time would be filled with competitors, now, there's huge applause for if one person shows up. That has to stop. It can't stop unless we do our best. Now, I maybe just be a voice crying out in the wilderness about this, but it's important that that voice is there. And I encourage you to please support natural bodybuilders. Support the ones who take the time to compete in the natural competitions. Support the ones who may not have 1 million followers on Instagram. Go follow them. Go follow them. See what they do, because what they do, what we do, is what you can do. The difference between me, them, and everybody else is just work, time, consistency. Genetics, yes, it plays a role, but I'll be honest with you. You can have poor genetics. If you spend 2 decades working out, eating properly, you'll look pretty decent. And that's the other thing too. Don't let anybody tell you that you need a drug to be physically impressive or to achieve any kind of excellence. It's high time that we start being kind to ourselves. There's so much nonsense on the issue of body image with women to begin with. This doesn't help. It doesn't help as well that it is so prevalent with young males. It's everywhere. It's time that it stops. So please believe in yourself. Think about what you can achieve. And if you yourself haven't been successful at natural bodybuilding and you've been training, you haven't been training for years on years, you haven't had really good coaching, you haven't given 1,000%, don't give up. Keep going, keep trying, and give those who have a chance and see them. Make sure that they're seen. Thanks for tuning in, and Excelsior.